what I'd like to talk about primarily today is challenges in actually commercializing AI products. So, we've talked a lot in yesterday's sessions and later today about the technologies. There's some great technical talks. And I think in this audience, where a lot of us are researchers, we kind of understand what it takes to do the research and to build technology, but what it takes to go the next mile, and it's really a hard mile, to turn technology into products that you can then sell into healthcare organizations or into drug companies that then impact the actual health system and patient lives, is a whole nother story. So with us today, from my left, your right, Andrea Vituro. I'm going to let each panelist introduce themselves and what they do, but Andrea is a communication specialist, Ginny Torno from Methodist, and Jim Colson from Texas A&M. And each one of them, again, has really a unique perspective. So Andrea, maybe you can start with a quick bio, and we'll run down, and then we can start with some questions.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I have been working in life science and healthcare communications for 15 years, always working on the earlier stage companies, combining technology and biology, doing something to try to move this forward. So have seen a lot of successes, have also worked with some very large tool manufacturers, have also seen some things kind of not play out on this early stage. So really excited to kind of talk to you about the whole range of the life cycle that I've seen.
Hi, Ginny Torno from Houston Methodist. I've been at Houston Methodist for 12 years, actually started out in the Research Institute in that space, and then about 3 years ago I moved over, and now I have a dual role over the inpatient IT teams and the innovation space. So in the innovation space in particular, we like to partner with companies and really help co-develop new technology, and so that's part of the lens that I'll be coming from today.
Hi, I'm Jim Colson. I'm the Associate Vice President of Digital Health at Texas A&M. Been there about 2 years. The rest of my career has been in industry, building product. I worked at Texas Instruments for a short time, then IBM for quite a long time. I retired as an IBM fellow. I was responsible for a $10 billion portfolio of SaaS properties that did a whole variety of things, all associated with delivery of capability to users, building product, as you talked about, and infusing that with AI and machine learning was the last 5 years of my career there. So I've seen the pitfalls, I've seen the successes, I understand some of these things, and we're going to talk about some of these things. And I'm bringing that capability now to Texas A&M as we drive a digital health initiative in concert with the medical activities going on at the university.
And again, thank you all. So I'd actually like to start, Ginny, right in the middle with you. And the problem I'm asking you to speak to is one where it's really familiar to me. I'm a founder, and we built a company based on some technologies that we thought were awesome. But we didn't really know what problem they were going to solve. And this is kind of the wrong way to build a company. You have a technology and you go searching for the problem. So how do you, as a consumer of these technologies, as someone who's looking to deploy them, how do you think about what problems are worth solving with novel innovation and with commercial products, for that matter?
So what we base everything on is everything either has to have an ROI that benefits Houston Methodist or helps our patients or staff. So those are the kind of the three realms that we look from. There's all kinds of cool tech out there, but if it doesn't meet one of those criteria, then we won't spend any time on it. So that's kind of our main driver.
And do you find you and your team going out to saying, all right, this is a problem we've got to solve, nurse burnout or whatever, let's go find a solution, or is it mostly inbound? Are people coming to pitch you, or is it both?
We have a stream of people coming inbound to us, but we really spend time on things that we're targeting. So some of the main things that we've done are around nursing shortages, trying to solve those issues. Also on the imaging side with radiologists, that's another shortage area in mammography. So that's some of the stuff that we've really been targeting, is how do we make sure we provide excellent patient care while dealing with some staffing challenges that everyone is dealing with.
Could you go a little deeper, maybe talk about some processes where you're looking at products that have been really successful, some implementations, and then the flip side of that, of course, is, you don't have to name names, but where have things really, fallen flat or tripped up?
Yeah, so some of our biggest successes have been in virtual care. So we actually have a pretty robust inpatient virtual care system, and what that has done is really alleviated the burden with anything from ICU to typical patient rooms, where we can do some of the really long, detailed tasks with the virtual nurse, really alleviates the bedside team time and lets them practice at the top of their license, we like to say. But so what we do with virtual care inpatient is admissions and discharges. And we've gone through, we're on our second technology company now as far as which partner we're using. And then within that, they're on their fourth or fifth camera design. So really working in a close partnership to help both sides have a successful product and a successful model. So that's been some of the most successful. And we've published studies, you could probably Google it, on what the success that we've seen with both patient care going up with more complete data and patients getting out the door faster, and also nursing satisfaction on that end as well. So, and that could also be used as an example of something that at first was a little rocky, because when we introduced this, the bedside nurses thought, oh, they're taking our jobs away. We can do this correctly. There's no way someone can do it through a screen. And in every single unit, by the second day, they were in love with it and didn't want it to be taken away. So some of the other things that we've tried that maybe weren't as successful, we tried to build our own voice tool for our ORs to, so provide a hands-free experience and log when a patient came in a room, when procedure was started, different tasks that you could log and automatically update Epic, which is our EMR. The reason we didn't continue that was just the expense of keeping up with that on our own and really keeping up with the development team needed and keeping it up to date with all the tech to keep that going on our own. So it's not that the tool itself wasn't working, it just wasn't worth the expense. It was cheaper for us to buy something, which is probably a later topic.
No, it's a great topic to continue on. I think we kind of appreciate how much research costs because we write grants and we have to line item everything. But product development is expensive, especially when there are clinical barriers. Jim, maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience, where you've built tech that absolutely works, but maybe the product doesn't land the way you expected it to for any set of reasons, and also how cost of build versus the unit economics of the sale factor into that.
Sure. So lots of examples. Some are highly public, you're probably aware of, some not so much maybe because they never actually saw the light of day. But the notion of operational expense, it was discussed in the presentation just before us, the whole deployment, the full life cycle of not just the research to create the product, but actually delivery and all the nuances associated with that. That's the total cost of ownership of deployment. And we're seeing this now with generative AI. It's massively expensive to operate. It was massively expensive to build. It's not generating the revenue that will sustain it. So there's lots of questions about, are we at the third AI winter? Or is this the precipice of that? Or is some breakthrough going to happen? If you think about in the healthcare space, there's lots of things that have been done. There was a presentation earlier about the devices and embedded machine learning, stochastic control would be the old term for it, but a lot of machine learning and growth. And those things have generated devices that generate revenue, that sustain. But some of the experimental things that are going on now, we have to be careful as an industry to recognize when things are experimental versus when things are commercially viable. And right now, I'd say with generative AI, we are taking things that are still experimental, highly public because of anthropomorphism, and ascribing commercial success to it when it doesn't have commercial success yet. And I can go through a lot of details, but I don't want to take up the whole panel time.
Well, let me just click on something you said. You mentioned highly anthropomorphic. Talk about that a little bit. What do you mean by anthropomorphic in the sense, and why is that, a good thing or a bad thing?
So we use these two letters, AI, to mean a whole swath of things in the industry, especially as we built things, and it's been around forever. Machine learning's been around forever, and it's highly successful. Every single one of you has some sort of learning system in your pocket right now because you've got a voice system, and that voice system is learning. I had an example in the car yesterday as I was driving here. I tried to call a colleague whose last name is Primo. It's spelled funny because it's French, and it always works when I use Siri, and it wasn't working in the car, and of course I was frustrated. And the reason is they had changed the model, and so it wasn't recognizing it. So anthropomorphism, the issue there is when we get to the user experience aspects, we always ascribe human characteristics to these things that are actually machine learning. And that sets an expectation that we're then dealing with a human. And we even talk about training as opposed to, injecting data, a more technical thing. We humanize or anthropomorphize these things. When generative AI systems make mistakes, which are mistakes, we call it a hallucination, like we can fix it with a drug. No, it's hallucinations. It's a mistake. But because we anthropomorphize and we drive that expectation, we then also have this background knowledge like, okay, but it's a machine, so it's infallible, but it's a human, so now it's an infallible human, and that's our expectation. And that's what's going on in the industry right now. And that's a problem because hallucinations are real. Nobody knows how to solve that problem. We don't actually have a deterministic system. Somebody asked about FDA approval earlier. If I need to go back in a legal setting, think about the legal aspects of medical, which is huge. If I got to go back and prove in a deterministic way that the advice that I got was this, some set of device, well, that machine has learned 50,000 times since then. I'll never be able to replicate what actually happened. In today's devices, it's static software, it's often old, it's often not network connected for these very reasons because of the approval process that it goes through and the static use. But the anthropomorphism expectations, the learning aspects, the challenges of a learning system not being able to backtrack, not being able to be recreatable, are all challenges that we have yet to deal with in a viable way, especially in the healthcare industry.
I think we actually want it both ways, though, as patients. Many of us in this room can probably identify with, you used to go on WebMD and get your symptom checker, and now you have cancer and you're going to die. And now it's progressed to Google, Dr. Google, you're going to ask all of this. Well, now you have ChatGPT, and you're going in and you're asking ChatGPT what's wrong with you to get a diagnosis. And we kind of look at it, we're like, I want an answer from this, but I also don't trust this because this is a robot doctor.
I think this is the challenge between autonomy and assistance and automation, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation. So from an autonomy standpoint, nobody's doing that. Nobody's doing that. From an assistance standpoint, we are doing that. But we're also qualifying it with somebody who actually has human expertise and can take into account all the complexities that's associated with my particular case to make that decision, right? And as long as we're in that, we recognize we're in that balance. It's the autonomy that's the risk. The assistance capability, the whole Microsoft branded the thing as Copilot, brilliant move by them, brilliant. Because that's what this is. And it's going to be a Copilot world in generative AI for a long time, maybe forever. And that, and we do benefit from that, right? We absolutely benefit from that. But we just got to make sure we understand as an industry that it's not always the case that the assistance is a cost-effective thing, going back to the business models, right? If I am a physician using generative AI to write my notes, I still have to review them. And because I now cognitively have to align myself with whatever was written, it may take me longer to review it than to write it in the first place, right? So it may not actually be saving me time, and it may not be saving me cognitive load at the end of the day. Those experiments have not proven out yet, as an example.
I mean, I think, your point about anthropomorphization is fair, but on the other hand, we want user adoption,
Yeah.
right? So we want these things to feel a little soft and fuzzy and friendly and approachable. And the other piece of it, Andrea, I'll turn this into a question to you, is, for technical founders, scientific founders building companies, we like to get out there and pitch our tech, but people don't buy tech, they buy solutions. And so maybe you can comment a bit on your experience having to help, scientists figure out how to talk about things, how to reach a branding, eureka like Copilot, right? Because if you start talking about injecting data, you're going to lose your buyer.
Right.
It's incredibly difficult, as everybody in this room knows, that we're dealing with people's lives. You can't just make things up and go with it. It's really important you can't make these mistakes, but you also need this adoption. You need to push these things through, and you have to be able to kind of sell that vision of what it potentially could do. So it is a really kind of delicate, complicated balance to try to strike. We've seen a number of failures from companies who overpromise. There's been technologies that really had great potential, but maybe they would do better now, but 10 years ago, they just kind of weren't ready yet for what we had. There's the issue of data that we've talked about on and on and on, that you can't take data from people in New York and expect it to work on people from China. These are all the problems that we have to solve, but you still can't get sucked into that. You still have to be able to come up with this vision of what you're going to do. And you can't also be hindered by, well, no one is going to take it. We know that it's going to take forever to get these things into the hospital. But if we stop at these earliest stages of dreaming of this vision, then we're not going to make any progress of these things. And you're also not going to get them off the ground. These investors are not going to come in and give you the money until you can really show that you can solve these huge problems.
Can I just add one thing to this? So this is because it ties back to something you said as well, and the presentation from before. So AI is a technology. You made this point. And the technology should be given to those that create the solutions. And that's where it matters that it's AI. The fact that I'm doing personalized medicine is what matters to the person, to the patient. They don't give a rip whether it was AI or not behind it, or a bunch of squirrels running in a box. They don't care. The personalized medicine sounds good. Tell me more about how you're going to improve my outcome, right? But AI is a developer brand, really. It's a creator brand. It's not an end user brand. We're in the industry right now. We're not making that distinction. So we have conferences that talk about AI where we think about it as a patient thing. It's not a patient thing. It's a creator thing. And I think the industry will settle in on that topic eventually, but right now it's got some, and this is the anthropomorphic problem, because the press likes to write about it, because when we talk about robots and taking people over and autonomy, and then the people see that, then they get scared, and they're like, I don't want a personalized medicine system that has AI because I feel like I'm at risk. We're actually hurting ourselves by driving the brand to the end user as opposed to driving the outcomes of the technology to the end user, my opinion.
And I think reiterating, even it's been said in this room, talking about robot doctors, that's not what AI in healthcare is doing. Raphael worked for a long time with the Alliance for AI in Healthcare, established in 2019 for the responsible adoption of AI across the continuum of everything from healthcare, from drug discovery all the way through to delivery devices, diagnostics, all of this. And the biggest thing that we came up against at the beginning was this concept of robot doctors. That's not what we're doing. Does that eventually become something? I doubt it. Who knows? But we now have self-driving cars. Who knows? But to ignore the tools that can be used to aid anything from physicians to hospital efficiencies, we need to get better at it. Yes, but I think this concept, this image that we have of what AI in healthcare is damaging and scary.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Ginny, do you think over the last handful of years, as the talk of AI as a tool has gone from everyone being totally skeptical, does this thing even exist? Is it all hype? To now it's coming to eat our children. Like the pendulum's really swung in terms of the extent to which people believe that it even exists. But do you see more sophistication in the way that products are developed and packaged and presented? To Jim's point, more about this is the problem we're trying to solve rather than we have a really great box of fast squirrels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we've seen is a focus on making sure the human stays in the loop. So maybe the tool helps you or suggests something, but there will come a stopping point where a human has to interact and do something. So for example, like one of the tools we have is a discharge summary tool, and it combs through notes and all kinds of stuff that people would normally manually look through and comes up with, hey, here's the steps to discharge. But it doesn't save to Epic. You still have to go look through it and confirm it. Yes, this is correct. No, this is not correct. Same thing with imaging diagnostic tools. Like you can scan images and say, oh, we think this person has a tumor in their lung. But it's not going to decide that for you. You still have to look at it and decide, is this correct or not? And am I going to save this or am I going to discard it? So I think that's where we've seen AI really come up as a really helpful tool, but not doing everything for you where you're going to end up with patient harm or incorrect decision. So.
I'd say workflow-wise, I'm just going to have one short thing. Workflow-wise, when we think about generative AI specifically, that's a topic that most people think about in the AI world today. To me, and I've been looking into this pretty deeply, when you think back through history, when we were interacting with a computer, we had a single screen thing, and we were synchronously going back and forth with the computer. We were single-tasked in all the workflow that we did. And then along came GUI systems, graphical user interfaces, and windowing systems. And now suddenly we as the user could multitask. We could have multiple windows, we could do multiple things, we could pause things, and it changed our workflow significantly. Now we're going back to a serial interface and interacting with a computer audibly. But the synthesis that happens behind the scenes of what's happening obviates a lot of the need for the GUI systems where I was doing cut and paste and looking at multiple things to integrate things in my head or integrate it literally on the glass. So I think generative AI is going to change the user experience of how we interact with these computing systems, and that's going to change workflows, and that's going to be the primary impact of generative AI, in my opinion. And those are the examples we actually saw this morning. Nobody said it that way, but that's what we saw, was out to the user. When we talk about interacting with the user, it's generative AI that's going to be the tool that changes and transforms the way that we do that going forward.
How then, I mean, if that's going to be one of the big impacts, how do we think about articulating value propositions, right? So I spend most of my time in the drug discovery, really the drug development space, and Linda showed a slide about the drug clinical trial failure rates, right? Okay, so our value proposition is we will boost clinical trial success by X%. But in a care delivery setting, Ginny, you talked about ROI. How do we actually communicate the value propositions? If we're talking about workflow disruption, that sounds scary and disruptive, not necessarily a positive. So what resonates with you guys in terms of how these solutions are going to have a positive impact on their consumers?
Yeah, first I'll say, at least at Houston Methodist, probably any healthcare system, that's the first thing you have to come out of the gate with is, that's nice, but what value are you providing to me? So the big ones for us are time savings, patient care quality type savings, of course, financial savings. But if it doesn't hit one of those three, then it's a little tough. Like one of the tools that we're doing right now is a patient engagement TV system. Really cool tech, gives them up-to-date information, gives the care team up-to-date information. Very tough to prove the ROI on it. It's mostly patient satisfaction, nurse satisfaction. That's nice and we want that, but we have to pay for the technology, so the bottom line is a little hard to justify on that one. So really it's like, are you going to allow us to provide patient care faster or more efficiently, or actually save us money are the big things.
Right, productivity or trust.
Right.
Those are big things, right? And productivity can be in a variety of places in that value chain. And trust has value, but it's hard to quantify.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
But thinking about actually delivering value, Jim, maybe you can give us some context though, the scale that we have to achieve to actually make the economics work. Like this is,
So here's some interesting data that you may or may not be aware of. ChatGPT 3.5, which is old, but this data is available. One single training session, and it's trained a countless number of times. One training session for ChatGPT 3.5 costs $4.6 million to execute. Today, the operating expense, I just read an article this morning in preparation for this, the operating expense for ChatGPT right now is $700,000 a day. They are projected economically to go bankrupt by the end of the year unless there's an infusion of money. Goldman Sachs has said recently that to break even on the investment that's happened just on generative AI, we would need to be generating $600 billion of annual revenue right now for a break even. That's not happening. Those things are not happening. So, but this problem has been solved before. There's lots of innovation that'll occur. Google created search by making massive amounts of data, and we all use Google search today. How did they make money? They didn't make money off of search. They made money off of pay-per-click advertising, an adjacent business model that then drove search. So what hasn't happened yet is the adjacent business model that's going to generate, $1 trillion of revenue that's associated with generative AI. It's going to be a companion to it, basically. It has yet to be innovated. I think the industry will find a way. It's not going to be click to pay advertising because the links are gone, right? The whole reference of how did I get to this conclusion in this generative AI thing is lost, so the backtracking is lost. So that business model is not viable, but there'll be something. Something's going to happen.
Someone will invent generative advertising. I'm sure of it.
Something,
Yeah.
yes. I'm sure it's being worked on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt.
I think you and I are reading on the same news this morning. So Goldman Sachs is having their big investor conference in San Francisco this week. And Fortune wrote an article this morning about it, that they put together this whole panel with the top VCs from Silicon Valley, and all of them sat up there and talked about how AI is the answer, in particular generative AI, and how they need to just get how they're watching the big tech companies to come in and partner with them. And that's what that we've talked a bit about, is that is that going to be the answer? Is there going to be partnerships? I think a big focus right now on the earliest stages of the industry are between between Google and Big Pharma coming in to work together to do something. I don't see that that's where it's going to be. I see these smaller startups are going to come in and be disruptive in a way that pharma continues to pay attention to them, while the big tech companies still try to kind of figure out their traditional model of doing things behind the scene and keeping everything secretive. But I don't see them coming into the industry enough and really engaging with all the other players to really solve some of these problems. So I still have a lot of confidence and hope, again, coming out of Silicon Valley, that these early stage companies are going to be the ones that really crack this innovation and get the investors in it to drive this forward.
I mean, it all comes down to user experience. It's got to drive trust. It's got to be easy to use, inherently familiar. It's got to drive outcome, value, some kind of value proposition, as you pointed out. And without some user in some part of the value chain having a breakthrough value proposition, there won't be a business model. It always comes back to user experience.
I want to pause there and just open up the floor for questions, make sure we have plenty of time to take audience questions. And if y'all don't have any, I've got lots more. So.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation here with the panel and Dr. Chen as well. Dr. Chen mentioned the invisible 80%. So maybe, Andrea, this is to you because you talked about communication. And so how do you bring in that 80% or, talk about how it's missing and not just focus on maybe mistrust, because some research shows that it's not a matter of mistrust. It's not a matter of social determinants of health. People do have transportation. They do have child care and all these other things. Some are very wealthy, but they're also missing in that invisible 80%. So how do you reach that as far as communication and that they're in the loop?
I'm actually going to pass this question back to Raphael, because his company has done quite a bit of work on equity and data sets.
Yeah, so I'll just speak from our experience. My company builds AI models that serve as the engine of novel cancer diagnostics. So the problem we're trying to solve is what I mentioned before, that promising drugs fail in trials, and even the few that squeak through the trials fail to work in the real world. And as Dr. Chin so beautifully illustrated, one of the major drivers of those failures is the fact that the drugs themselves were not developed on representative data, and the trials themselves are not representative of the real world. So even if you get through a trial, you hit the real world, and neither your AI nor your drug has seen anything like it. So the short answer of how you do better, first of all, it's not for us so much about communications. You just have to try harder. You have to go out of your way to find data that looks like the world. And so we go out into the world. We have one signed partnership in India, working on another. We have a partnership in Taiwan. We're working on one in mainland China. We source data from all over East Asia. We're working on getting African diaspora data, which is a little bit trickier due to the fact that there's just a lot. We work with sequencing data. There's a lot less sequencing in continental Africa, but we can certainly find African diaspora data. We try hard. We have a guy in the company. This is his job. It's go out in the world and find data that looks like the world. And so I think that's the short answer, is you just have to try harder. It's a little bit like, if you're trying to build a diverse organization that looks like the world, you have to go out of your way to hire people who look like the world and not just like, the two co-founders in Silicon Valley. In terms of communicating that, I do think it's important then that we communicate our values around, representative data and why it's important, that we communicate our strategy around it. And when the tools end up working better, we can point to this as the reason why. It's not because our algorithms are better. We actually don't do a ton of innovative algorithm work. We are not going to be able to compete with Anthropic and Google and OpenAI in terms of building smarter mathematics. Those guys have a lot more money than us, a lot more engineers than we do. But what we can do is take the algorithms that they commoditize and apply them to much better assembled data sets, and now you've got, a winning solution, in my opinion.
Just to follow up, you mentioned East Asia, right? Taiwan,
Right.
China, both places we have border. What are you doing Southeast Asia? I'm thinking Indonesia, Malaysia, groups that are feeling left out, and also in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is working on it. We're a pretty small team. I mean, we will get there. So we do have Korean data. Our hopeful Chinese partner is developing capacity in Indonesia and Malaysia. So, the goal is to partner with them through that region. But, we're sort of taking it, one partnership at a time. I left out Qatar, so we have a Middle Eastern partnership we announced earlier this year. Again, we just try harder, but we're also, limited in bandwidth. So. Yes. I mean, maybe that's the first step, right? Acknowledge the problem. We have a question in the back.
Yes, so this is Sunil Bochre. I'm from University Health in San Antonio. And I actually did my pediatric oncology fellowship at MD Anderson. So I kind of, what Dr. Chin said earlier, like we see amazing data in clinical trials, but then you go in real life and it doesn't hold up. So I completely agree with that. The problem is, and just giving an example, it's like giving a kid an iPad and expecting it to like learn everything about life just from the iPad. The goal should be the parent should sit down with the kid, use the iPad maybe for storytelling or something like that. And I think that kind of reflects the difference between a clinical trial outcome and something that just in real life, when the parent doesn't have time to sit down and focus on the kid and actually tell the kid how to use something. And I have seen very little, and I think the question is, there has been very little push in terms of incentivizing training more people in this field. There is very little financial incentive. No one wants to go in the medical field because the pay doesn't justify the stress, the work hours, all the burnout that comes with it. We get a lot of tech, but nothing happens in terms of we don't get, as physicians, we don't get quality support staff. A lot of times RNs are replaced by MAs, and you cannot expect the same outcome because they're just not trained enough. So I feel like we have a lot of tech, amazing tech that's useful. We just don't have the right people to use it. So just wanted to see what your thoughts were on that.
I'll say one thing about Texas A&M is very focused on the rural population. And in Texas, we have 4.7 million rural people. It's by far the biggest population, rural population in the country. And one of the things that has occurred to me, kind of we're working through, is the economics. You mentioned economics. Well, it's the population density in urban populations makes it more economically viable to do things in the urban population and not so much in the rural population. And this is a pretty controversial and provocative comment, but I'll throw it on the table for you guys. If you look at the GDP and the economic impact of people that work at King Ranch, let's say, that are driving the food chain, per population, that person is having more GDP impact than somebody who's a barista in downtown Houston. And so maybe the payment system should actually recognize the economic impact of the people that are being treated and pay according to that economic impact, because ultimately it's an economic problem. That's not what happens today, and that's, in my opinion, that's why we're not actually treating people in rural and distal populations, because we don't have the economics to justify it. But when you look at the GDP contribution of those people, many of them are disproportionately, heavily contributing to the GDP. We don't recognize it in the payment system. That's my provocative point for the day. Because now you're putting dollar values on a human, right? In a way, and that's very controversial.
No, but economists,
I come from
economists
industry,
are perfectly comfortable doing that, and we'll try. But Linda, I think you had a comment about maybe the support staff, yeah?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see who there, the question. I want to come back to the point about the workforce. I think that is a major problem. We need people who can use the tech to deliver the care. But I also think that we need to take the first principle approach and rethink how these care teams should be constructed and how they should deliver. Not just this is the way we do things now. How can you help me do more of the same? If you look at what a clinic nurse does, a third of their time are doing things that don't need to be done physically in person.
Right,
Okay?
right.
So then if you can just take that load, shift that off, now your one person, becomes, what's the math? Your 3 people become 4 people. I'm not doing really well here. And that's sort of how we design our services, right? Because we have to present, to your point, what's the ROI? Well, not in MD Anderson's or Methodist, but if you go out into South Texas or, somewhere, it's hard to hire an experienced specialty nurse, and it's hard to retain them. So if you have one, how do you make that one nurse practice at the top of the burden? Licensure by taking at least a third of what could be done by someone else remotely without that person. And on top of it,
And asynchronously, remote and asynchronous.
right, exactly,
Yeah.
and do so
Right.
by so in our case, education, symptom monitoring, and triage and assessment, that can happen in real time 24/7 and take that third workload off that clinic nurse because honestly, they got other things that they need to do. But that is changing how we assign tasks to roles in the clinic team because you break it down and say what needs to be done and who should be doing that. And that's the way we think about how to help the community that are less accessible. And then that also gives us the ability to now reach into that community. And that's what I meant. Once you have that reach, maybe you have opportunity to communicate the research, the clinical trial to them. Because ultimately, patients participate in research at MD Anderson because they came to MD Anderson for care. You got to first address the fact that we have to deliver care to these populations. And if you don't deliver care to them, they're not going to participate in research.
Said something that I thought was provocative. Interesting. 'Cause you said that generative AI is kind of changing the way that humans interact with products, and I wondered what you meant by that, and I wanted to tie it to something else you said, which is that users, users have trust expectations and all these types of things. Like, the user experience is really central. And so, if you think that generative AI is really changing everything in terms of how we interact with these products, do you mean that that we're going to be interacting with bots? I mean, that's what we see so far anyway.
Interacting with what?
With bots,
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and
Sure.
and that sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't, right? So I just wonder, like, if you think that how you
I'm
think
not
that's gonna
saying it's
roll
all a
out.
panacea. There's challenges because you don't know when you're interacting with a hallucination. Like, you get a bunch of things back, you presume it's all facts, and then suddenly it's not. There's many cases, there's high-profile cases right now. A lawyer, had 6 cases that were fictitious. They used as references, as case studies, and they turned out to be fiction. So I'm not saying it's a panacea. I'm just saying that the genre is going to change, that we're going back to a serial interface, which is conversational between a human and a machine, as opposed to a messy desktop with a bunch of graphics where I am reading and interpreting and cutting and pasting. I think that sea change of experience, user experience, will also change the way we do workflow. And to Dr. Chin's point, asynchrony is the way you drive efficiency, right? So when you offload that work and you can do it in an asynchronous way when there's downtime, then you're more efficient. This is why cloud computing is more efficient than on-premise services, because on-premise systems rise and fall in their demand. And now I can apportion those machines on a cloud. It's the same human aspect of that when we're talking about adjusting workflow and saying, let's move things to the back office, and then maybe those back office things can further be moved to automation and further that workload, and leave the critical things like a provider interacting with a patient to be the primary thing that gets done, instead of, I've forgotten your number, 59% of the time is spent interacting with the EHR, or some ungodly number, right, where they're actually thinking about billing stuff. They're not even thinking about the patient. They're thinking about, how do I transcribe this to a set of codes to get paid? It's an insane process. Coming from industry, I can't stand it. I'm just telling you, I'm very motivated to fix this problem in some way. But I think generative AI is going to have an impact to that, provided it can be economically viable. Right now, it's very expensive. Very
Provided
expensive.
it can actually be good, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's going to continue to get better and better, but
Yeah.
I just wonder if people are going to, like, try start demanding authenticity, like having another human, you know, on the other side, or if they're going to ultimately be okay with that.
Jane, how do you guys think about it when it comes to physician tools for clinical decision support tools? Do you guys take physician training into account when you consider if you're going to adopt one of these? Or how does that process work for you guys? If a physician loves it or a physician feels like, I don't want anything to do with this, even if it's proven.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also a mix of some being all on board and then some like, no, I'm just going to keep, using my notepad. So yeah, there's definitely training and change management and communication is a huge part of it. So really what a key that we found is finding a group of people that are willing to be those first adopters and really, help work through the kinks and all of that. And then they become your mouthpiece. So it's not IT saying, hey, this is a cool tool. It's one of their peers. And let me show you this, and you can come ask me questions, if you're not sure how to use it. So that's been a big key to success.
Guys, we have 2 more questions I want to take. Before we do, let me sneak in this announcement. It's actually break time. There's coffee and snacks in the exhibit hall until 11. After that, there are going to be technical talks here in room 280. With that said, I'm happy to stick around and field questions for a while. I'm perfectly well caffeinated and don't need a break. So if you want to stay in your seats and ask questions, we can keep this discussion going for a little while longer. Anyone else who's ready for coffee and cookies? And we have a question in the back and then one more over here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I want to ask a question with regards to the additional labor involved with bringing it and how generative AI can supplement that. And the question there, the problem with this additional labor is in part the chain of custody or chain of responsibility. And that's usually why we have these extra roles in there. So how do you address that chain of responsibility in the healthcare setting with generative AI coming in?
I'll just say that I think that's why it's Copilot, right? Because you still got to have the expert in the loop. If think about the complexity. If the complexity, think about a metric of 0 complexity to highly complex, and then think about a vertical metric of risk to human life is nothing versus risk to human life is everything. Down here in this bottom corner, Spotify recommending a new song, not a big risk, not very hard. Robotic surgery, all the way up to the top. You're going to put the experts in the loop when there's risk to human life and when it's complex, period. That's what's been said in a variety of visual forms, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, you can't remove the expert from the loop. And then we've seen examples where they tried to totally automate something, like with insurance claim denials, and things were being denied that shouldn't have been denied. So we've seen where it proves that you do need the expert in the loop.
Could I then actually make a sort of a slight counterpoint to that? So this is said, there's caution here, right? And I'm an ex-doctor, so non-malevolence is key to healthcare. But the ultimate black box is clinical training. Like no one can tell, me why I came to a particular decision about care, and we have incredibly poor assessments of clinicians' performance. Whereas I think actually with technology, we have the ability to assess that performance much more rigorously, and there are good mechanisms, the FDA and all other regulatory bodies, to try and ensure that we do deliver things in a safe way. I think that that is an understandable concern, but there are mechanisms to deal with it. But I think the other side, the positive side of it, is actually let's ask patients. So we deliver a fully autonomous clinical solution to replace care in the UK. We've delivered that to about 40,000 patients. We ask every single patient what their rating of that is, which is not what I ever did as a doctor. And the modal response is 10 out of 10 that they'd recommend it to other people. We're going to be doing it with Houston Methodist shortly. But I think that's because, to the point about convenience for patients, we deliver a solution that's convenient to people, particularly who are traveling from a long way away. So I think we always, it's always said you underestimate or overestimate how much impact there can be from technology in the short term, but underestimate it in the long term. And I think we're at risk of kind of being a bit worried by some of these things and actually missing out on the huge benefits that we can deliver in the longer term.
Yeah, and I'd say the key to that is patient consent. If the patient's aware that it's a computer system doing that, then you're fine, and they either decide to accept that or they're not comfortable with it. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I'm 10 out of 10 stealing that line that clinical training is the ultimate black box. That's a great line. We have a question over here.
My name is Sivaram, and I'm a surgeon and a clinical ontologist. Something that Jim said earlier, right? We are seeing examples where things are just made up, hallucinations. Now, as a surgeon, even I find it difficult many times to figure out whether something that has the answers that I'm getting using ChatGPT or any LLMs, is that correct or not, right? I may need to do some referencing. I need to dig in deeper to understand that. So, given that, how would how would a normal man, normal person, a non-trained, a non-domain expert ever figure out whether something is right or not? And now, if this were a human being, right, somebody who just made things up, would you ever trust him? And the answer to that, I think, is a no. You would never go to that person again to get anything, any information, because you can never trust them. So why do you think that it is okay to put these kind of tools in the public space? And, and it's going to lead to a lot of issues going forward.
Well, there's two genres. There's a genre of creativeness to generate things that don't have any ground truth, right? I need to write a 800-word documentary on some topic. I put in a few facts, it writes a documentary. I'm the author, the quote-unquote author. I'll check to see if I think it's something I could have written, and I write it and I publish it and I'm done. You're talking about fact-based things. Fact-based things are much more difficult, right? Where I have to, and I think the trust thing is a huge topic. And it's not solvable because you can't backtrack in a generative AI system. You can't say, how did you come to that conclusion? You can't ask it. Nobody knows because the data sets are too large. And so there's no backtracking. Bing is trying to do some breadcrumbing of sorts, but it's...
And the Google system, Gemini cites everything. Whether the citations are real is something I haven't investigated, but it does cite everything.
Right. The citations are pretty risky.
Yeah.
There is
in and of
something,
themselves.
though, about,
Sure.
Right.
but if you're looking to eliminate risk to absolutely zero, medicine is practice anyway. Physicians are going to
That's right.
continue to make mistakes. Surgeons will make mistakes. Maybe you're tired. It's just a bad day. Whatever. We're all still human. And so again, to your original point, are we setting a standard for this machine that is completely unattainable?
Right.
I'm sorry, but as a wise person once said, right, you can have your opinions, but you can't make up facts. I'm sorry, I butchered that. So it's a case of, if you give an opinion, you give a conclusion for something, that's good. But if you just make facts up, then there's no basis for any conversation or any discussion.
I mean, I'm not a medical provider, but I would presume that what happens in this situation, what I would hope happens, is you see a recommendation and it either triggers something in your memory that you then have trust on. You say, I have personal experience that now is going to be the basis of my decision. Or you say, I don't have any freaking clue if that makes sense. And you call a colleague,
Yep.
right? Somebody you trust.
Yep.
The B2C problem, the consumer getting diagnosis off the web, we have that with WebMD already. It predates. So we have that problem. Oh my gosh, I know I have cancer because I read it on the web. I mean, I don't know how to fix that.
I don't think you can allow it to hinder progress either, to the point that we were talking about, that it's going to get better. If you look at ChatGPT 3.5 versus the new version of 4.0, Nature published it. They sent it through the medical board's test, and 3.5 got 57% of the answers right, versus now 4.0 is up to like 83%. Go read the article. Don't cite me specifically on that. But it did improve. And so for us to stop and be like, this isn't working, to the point we have to keep physicians involved. We can't just completely automate this and get rid of them. But we have to use this information to continue to make ourselves better and to serve patients better.
I do think he's demonstrating an example. Let me just add one thing. I think he's demonstrating an example that I'm worried about with the anthropomorphism. When I Google something, I get back a bunch of links, I got a bunch of articles, and I read that, and I know that I'm reading documentation. When I converse with the machine, I get back a very flowery description that makes me feel like I'm talking to a human, and I start to ascribe human infallibility to that, like I must be talking to another doctor. Look at this, look at, you know, they said everything. And I think that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in, associated with the user experience of generative AI as opposed to searching. I mean, I think that's your...
Yeah, it's a matter of trust, right? Okay,
Yeah.
agreed, there are certain things that AI-based tools, and it's an umbrella of tools, do very well, like in image recognition, or even creating images and things like that. But there are other areas which it's terrible. It hallucinates. I just can't trust it. I can't believe a word it says. Now, that may be too far-fetched, but here's the thing. Let's say 80% of the time it is correct, and 20% of the time it makes things up, or it's wrong. How do you know what that 20% is? And if I don't know what that 20% is, I have to check every single thing, which means that I have to check all
That's
the
what I
100%.
mentioned about the notes.
At that point,
that's right.
it's useless to me, because I am doing
I don't know about useless.
much more
I don't know
work.
about, I think useless is that's too far afield.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree, Jim, your point about, you know, the infallibility or the assumed infallibility. But I do want to point out one point about this medical test, right? Passing an exam is exactly, like, to me, it is something in isolation. Because a MES students, or whatever test they did, who pass the exam, if you are sick, would you want that person to treat you? In fact, how many of you said, I don't want to go to the hospital in July, because that's when the new doctors come in. And I rather want the old guy with the gray hair, you know, who may or may not be up to date on the guidelines, the latest and greatest. I still prefer them because they know. And I think that's really where
That's
what
why
I meant by
residency matters.
control introduction comes in, right? These exams are not in context. It does. It's like it try to make medicine this monolithic answer, decision, as if that will solve all the problem. It's not. And when we focus so much on how great ChatGPT can do on an exam, as if that's equivalent to them being able to replace a doctor, that's where the problem is. For all the things you said.
Exactly.
It's the silos, though, also approach that you're still talking about, that it's this or it's that. It's either ChatGPT is making all the diagnoses or the doctor is doing it. Why, like, we need to redefine success into that there is a blend that benefits everybody here.
Well, that's the difference between autonomy and volunteer.
That's right.
This is a lot of fun. I'm going to let everyone get coffee and cookies, but just a parting thought, since I'm the moderator, I can have the last word. Generative AI and large language models and chat interfaces are absolutely on everyone's tip of their tongue. They probably are the future, but that's not all of AI, frankly.
That's right.
And the good news is, there was a question for Linda earlier, which we didn't get to fully flesh out, is where do the regulators come in? We work in a regulated environment. We work in a very tightly regulated environment. And so while I believe that we need a whole new framework for how we think about regulating consumer-facing AI, because it is scary, it is making crap up, and I think the biggest threat to our society right now is misinformation and information silos. It's a whole other topic we can have another session on. In healthcare, the AI my company builds, we build shallow artificial neural networks. We build super explainable, unblack boxy, things that the FDA can sink their teeth into, chew on, understand, and feel trusted. It's going to be deterministic and not change, and every patient is going to get an equally accurate prediction. And that's the bulk of AI in healthcare. Almost every medical device that includes AI has gone through some regulatory approval process. And I, for one, have a lot of faith in our regulatory system to pump the brakes a little bit, to be intentionally slow and deliberate. And I think that's a good thing. You know, my interactions with the FDA have all been positive. I think they're forward-looking, but they're not in a hurry. And, you know, be very wary with Dr. Google, but I think, you know, your doctor at Methodist is probably going to give you the best, closest to right answer that he or she can. So, for now. Thanks, everybody. Grab some coffee and cookies. We'll be around.